Welcome to It's a Woman's World, a show which discusses any and all topics under the sun from a woman's point of view. Today's moderator is Ali Naithani.
Welcome to the show. We're so glad you're with us today. And to get started, I'm going to introduce my co-hosts. We have Nadia Giordana.
Happy to be here today.
Always great to see you, Nadia. Junita Flowers, how are you?
Good to see you, Ellie.
Thank you. And Dr. Susan Strauss. Hey, Susan.
Hey, Ellie. Good way to spend a Sunday afternoon.
It absolutely is. And I'm excited about our topic today, as I think we live in a great state, the state of Minnesota, and a great quality of life here. We're going to learn a little bit more about the Human Services Department. And we have with us today the Commissioner, Emily Johnson-Piper. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Emily, tell us exactly. I mean, we all hear about the Department of Human Services, but, you know, what is it anyway? I mean, what is the umbrella? What are you in charge of? What goes on? What do you do?
Well, the Department of Human Services is really one piece of how human services is administered across Minnesota. So we have a state supervised, county administered system of human services, and then we have a really robust nonprofit sector as well in Minnesota that partners with us to provide services. But our state agency serves over 1 million people every year in our state. The biggest bucket of service is really people on our public health care programs. So medical assistance and Minnesota Care. We also serve people in food assistance, daycare assistance, and then about half of our staff provide services in direct care and treatment. So running state hospitals, state psychiatric hospitals, 120 or so group homes all across the state where people with really severe developmental disabilities and mental illness live. So we really touch a lot of lives in the state of Minnesota every day and are proud of our work.
Yeah, you should be. It sounds great.
Yeah. So in your department at the state level, are you more responsible for policy changes and then setting budgets, and then because we have county leadership, and then how does that trickle down from county to city and then into the nonprofit sector?
It kind of depends on the area. So for medical assistance and Minnesota Care, medical assistance is really for healthcare for the poorest in our state. And the counties administer, so they're the people that sign people up directly. We run the systems and also provide the funding for the counties to do that. Minnesota Care is our healthcare program for people who we consider sort of like the working poor in our state. And we run that program directly. So we enroll people directly into that program. We do all of the mental health policy, set mental health policy and chemical dependency policy for the state of Minnesota, and then also work with the counties around enrolling people in daycare assistance or food assistance, and we oversee the work of the counties as they enroll people in our programs, and also oversee their work in child protection. We with nonprofits, we work with them in a variety of different ways. So from helping support their funding to really partnering with them on things like adoption and foster care and that kind of work. So it's a really intricate web, complex web, but we're fortunate in Minnesota, particularly given our strength of our nonprofit sector, that we have so many people all rowing in the same direction for the people we're all trying to serve.
And is your office in charge of licensing for like group homes or the ones that fall under the Human Services umbrella? Does your department do that, or does that get licensed through each county?
So it depends. So I think a good example is daycare centers. So we are the licensor for daycare centers, and then we also do some of the inspections, and sometimes counties do them. So for in-home daycares, although we're the ultimate licensor at the state level, we contract with counties to do the actual inspections. But for daycare centers, we also license those, but we do the investigations and inspections ourselves. So it kind of depends on the area.
And are you referring to daycare for children or daycare for vulnerable adults, which I thought you made a reference to that? Or are they both under the same umbrella?
Well, we do both. And
Okay.
so, and sometimes depending on the type of entity. If it's a nursing home where vulnerable adults are living, usually those are licensed by the Department of Health, which is a separate state agency. But we do group home licensing where lots of vulnerable adults in our state live, and we do some of the inspections for those homes as well.
Emily, one of the things as you were describing what your department does is, some of the tough stuff that must come out, some of the work. I think about news stories where I hear nurses or other medical professionals being beat up or hurt. I think of when I hear stories in the news about children and protection. And so just curious, as the leader of this organization, how do you keep your people motivated, and how do you day in and day out come back and keep doing this work, which I think is really, really tough?
Well, I think one of the challenges and then the ultimate rewards of working in human services is just the humanity of it. And that's what people in our agency and in counties doing this work aren't doing it for the money. They're not doing it for the fame. They're not doing it for the glory, but they're doing wonderful work. And I think many of us doing it every day feel very called to the importance of the work.
What was your pathway of getting into this very responsible position within the state? That would be interesting to hear. And I know you said you've got a JD. Does this require a JD? But maybe you could just talk to us about how did you get here?
Well, I've never been someone that has thought this is my linear path and I'm going to follow, my plan. So I'm a lawyer, and I practiced in a law firm for several years. And then when Governor Dayton was elected governor, I felt very called to public service, and I'd been active in my community just personally before that. And so I started out at the Commerce Department, which regulates about 20 different industries in the state, including insurance, in 2011. And it was right at the time when the Affordable Care Act was being implemented across the country. And a big component to that was the insurance laws were changing. And so I started in state government working a lot on health reform. And I worked at the Commerce Department for about 3 years, and then ended up meeting a lot of people in state leadership, including the governor's general counsel at the time, who I worked with a lot on health reform in particular. And I was coming back from maternity leave with my 4th baby, and she was pregnant with her first, and she said, I really want to be able to take maternity leave. Would you help serve as the governor's general counsel while I'm on leave? And so that was my job before this, as I was the governor's general counsel. She ended up not coming back, and the governor asked me to stay and serve as his general counsel. So I did that and learned a lot about the challenges we were facing in state government with human services. It was our sex offender program was ruled unconstitutional.
I remember that.
Our state's Olmstead plan was under court supervision, which is how we're going to work to integrate people living with disabilities into the community. And just other issues around MNsure's rollout and the IT challenges. And so when Commissioner Jessen, the former Commissioner of Human Services, was appointed to the Minnesota Court of Appeals, the governor asked me to serve as his Human Services Commissioner, because I'd been working on a lot of the issues for a couple years as his general counsel.
So what is it like then, as a woman in this position over the state? What are some of your challenges, do you think, that you run up against, particularly as a woman? I'll say if any, but I would assume that there would be some.
Well, I think one of the challenges comes to not only from being a woman, but also being younger than a lot of other people that I'm engaging with at the CEO level, from organizations that the state contracts with. And, I think one of the big challenges is just this constant need to demonstrate that I've got the goods.
Yeah,
and that I know the details of all the different programs that we run. And, I think that's one of the really hard things about this job is there's so many different areas that you have to know a lot about. And on day one, you need to know everything, or you feel the need to know everything. And so that's been one of the real challenges about being a woman leader. It's just, I think, men naturally don't feel this inherent desire, inherent need to know everything on day one, where maybe I'm generalizing, but I definitely felt that
relate.
pressure.
Yes, yes, I would think so too. Plus, you're a mom of 4 kids, so then it's balancing all of that. That, of course, I'm past that stage, but I know Junita, you are, and Ali, you still are, and having to balance that is tough, especially when you're in a highfalutin position.
Right.
I think it kind of keeps it real for me. There's nothing like a 3-year-old screaming at you while you're on the phone to bring it home that this is number one, what we need to be about.
Yeah.
And so, you can have all of the really hard conversations about complex issues, and then it just keeps you real to have to go home and, argue about
Where's my shoes?
an appropriate level of ranch dressing on a plate, So.
It's funny that you bring that up. I can think of just a quick funny story. When I had a suit on one day and I was going to a meeting, and I have a small business, and I was going in, and after the day, and my son came home at the time, I think he was like 6, and he was like, "Mom, you look like a butler." So it's like, and it's like you go in and you're really excited about this accomplishment, then you come home and your kids do help you to keep it real, because you're like, oh, that's not quite the look I was going for.
Great story.
I was going to say, so tell me what a good day. I mean, you have a big job, a lot of responsibility, a lot of controversy comes in the news about what you've done right, what you've done wrong, why it's never enough. So there's always scrutiny about your role or your department. Tell me what a good day looks like for you and your department.
I think every day I can find something good, even in the most challenging days. One of the best days I have had as commissioner was a day where I got to spend a fair amount of time promoting adoption in Minnesota.
Oh.
And I'm public guardian to a lot of kids. When kids are state wards and vulnerable adults are state wards, they're wards of the Commissioner of Human Services. And at any given time, there's hundreds of kids waiting to be adopted who are state wards. And so promoting adoption and thanking families who've adopted kids out of foster care was a really fun event and just a fun, special day.
Yeah.
To make you feel like, this is why I'm doing this.
So Emily, just to clarify what you said, they're literally the wards that's attributed right to the commissioner, as you said. Oh, that's interesting.
And
didn't
what does that
realize
mean exactly to you?
Well,
I mean, if they're award to you,
Right.
not the state really, to you, right?
It's so I think it's something that people don't think about a lot and don't know a lot about how the system works. So when I started as commissioner, and myself included, when I started as commissioner, I was briefed that there's about 2,000 people with disabilities who are my wards, who are wards to the Commissioner of Human Services. And when and much of the responsibility is delegated to the counties, to county workers, to go and advocate on behalf of
Still
people.
daunting.
Still daunting, and people that I don't know, that I've never met, that I don't know a lot about the process, and so it was a huge learning curve for me to say, well, I need to know more about how people are being cared for and how the system works. And so I said, or I'm just not going to delegate any authority. And then my leadership says, well, don't not delegate authority. We got to keep the system working. And so I said, well, so our chief medical officer said, well, how can we make you comfortable with this really immense responsibility? And I said, I need to go see some of my wards. And so every time now that I travel, I try and find a spot and meet some people who I'm public guardian to. And I go into their homes, I talk to the staff that work there, I get tours of their bedrooms, meet them, so I can be assured and comforted knowing that the people providing the work on a daily basis are taking good care of the people that I have the ultimate responsibility for.
That's kind of beyond words.
It really is.
It really
It
is.
gets to the core of what your department is called.
Mm-hmm.
When we think of state government, we think of, all the things that we hear about in the news.
Bureaucracy and all
Yes,
of that.
but you are there as a service to the humans in our community. And when you said talking about and celebrating adoption, or the fact that you are the legal guardian to so many individuals, that's the part that we don't think a lot
No,
about.
it's
But that gets at the
overwhelming.
core. Your department exists to provide a valuable service to the humans of our state. So I guess on behalf of us, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah,
Thank you
right.
for taking so much pride in it. And then to even say, when you're thinking about like a really, really good highlight of a day, is being able to make that connection and celebrating a department or a portion of your department that can be really tough, because we know with adoption comes stories, and with stories comes human lives that may not be set up to win or have had so much loss. So thank you.
I have a question for you. We've had, of course, a very interesting, to put it mildly, election. And I'm curious, what do you see the election results, both in Minnesota, but also nationally with President-elect Trump? What changes do you anticipate seeing with the Department of Human Services as a result of both state and national election results?
Well, I'm really concerned on the national level. Minnesota has been a leader, in particular in our healthcare area, so how we run our government healthcare, our public healthcare programs, and a lot of that leadership has been innovation that our state has been allowed to do. Most recently as part of the Affordable Care Act. So as part of the Affordable Care Act, we expanded public health care coverage to over 200,000 people in this state, and without the Affordable Care Act, I'm very concerned that that will go away. And then, I just am also concerned more globally around block grants and the challenges that block grants have for states like Minnesota, where
What are block grants?
so it's basically, instead of having a per person reimbursement, it would be each state gets a set amount of money, a block of money. And normally it's a lot lower. Ultimate, it might be, the way these work, it might be pretty even the first few years, but after the first few years, then the block grant stays the same and the costs go up, up, up. And so states like Minnesota, where we have done a lot to ensure that we have the best value possible and the most savings possible for our programs, oftentimes suffer as a result of changes at the federal level, where more of the focus and more of the funding is targeted on those states that aren't doing as well as our state. And so that's the federal level challenges. At the state level, I think it sort of remains to be seen. Governor Dayton is still the governor with
Yes.
his own mandate for the next 2 years. And, he is committed to protecting his own mandate regardless of the composition of the legislature. In 2011, when I came to state service, both houses of the legislature, Republican, and the governor was Governor Dayton. And it was the legislative session ended with the state's longest shutdown of state services in our state's history. So
Yes.
there's always that fear in the back of my mind that we don't want that to happen again.
Yeah.
Because it has such a negative impact.
Well, this has been just great conversation. We thank you so much for sharing with us and being here today. And we're going to have you stay right with us as we go into something that we like to do on the show, which is our surprise question. I don't know what this question is, so our director, Mike Rosberg, has put a question for us. So I'm about to read this, and then we'll have a discussion. So,
They're usually fairly thought-provoking.
yes,
Yes.
that's a good description, Susan. So here it is. People may have one of two motives when they approach you for money, services, or material goods: need or greed. How can you tell which one their motive is, and what role do need and greed play in human life generally?
Oh, Mike.
Today's Sunday. We don't really think that.
Yeah,
deep on Sundays. Not this late in the afternoon.
I don't think it would be in my case, anybody that I might think of that would come to me for money is somebody that I know. I don't think it would be that difficult for me to determine whether that was a need or that was greed.
How would you determine?
Well, I suppose it would be my own personal opinion of what would be need or greed. In their mind, it's need across the board. I might not think so, but that would be my motivator as to whether I had the funds or said I had the funds or not to loan money. But I think I could tell the difference as to whether I would feel compelled, and I think I would know what I think would be greed or need.
You know, I worked in nonprofit for about 24 years. And, you know, kind of getting into, so when I worked at a shelter, you know, and it was a shelter for families experiencing homelessness. So we had families living in the shelter. And a lot of times people judge that families are working the system or milking the system, and they're getting this benefit and that benefit, and they're being greedy. We're at the heart of it all. There's such a deep need, and they don't always know how to get to that need or fill that need. So to the average person that does not understand the dynamic of poverty, it's easy to judge and say that they are being greedy. But when you think about the resources that they get, they're not getting a ton. It's, I want to take care of my family. I don't know if I have enough. I don't really know how to do that. So then they have approaches that may appear that way. So sometimes I think at the core of some people's greed, there is a need, a deep-seated need, but because they don't ask appropriately, it can come off as greed. Now, that's not everybody.
Very important point, though, especially when you don't know that person
Right.
well. Very important point.
Well, when we often see that person standing on the street corner and you're still waiting at that light and you're just hoping you get the green so you
Now,
don't have
that's
to.
a hard
Yes.
situation
Right?
to know. Is this person really homeless and needy?
Yeah.
Or is it one of those stories you've heard about? That's difficult.
That's a difficult one, isn't it? And so in that moment, it's all about what are you going to do in that moment? And I've even had moments where I'm with my kids and I'm afraid to roll down the window because I you know, just out of fear, I guess, which is my own thing. But so I think about that a lot. I think about when my children approach me and they need something, and sure, sometimes it's a little bit on the greed, like I want this, I want that. So I was just thinking about from that level and how have I, you know, so in those moments with your kids, you're like, well, why do you really need that $85 game right now? Like
Yes,
what,
that's
you know,
right.
so what, we
Yes.
just bought you one, like, and so that my mind sort of went to that shift, but then helping them to teach to some of the things that you were just calling out, Junita. But I do think, you know, that moment some of us have been put in, well, I've been put in with my let's close friends or family where someone really had a need and really, so let's say a financial need or they were in some dire straits, really thinking about my relationship with them and did I expect them to even pay me back? So it really stretched me in that way in some of those moments I've had where, you know, thinking about it as a person and in my relationships with others and how much I can give to them. So that made me think about that at such a deeper level that I probably wouldn't have otherwise. Yeah.
I think you bring up something too about children, and I think about that with my grandchildren. Do they need anything? Heavens, no. They've got more toys and more stuff and more opportunity to play sports and to travel than I certainly ever had. And I think sometimes because they don't need, but they want, then I think sometimes they are greedy. But then what do I do as the grandma? It's like, oh yes, let me get that for you.
know, we
Even
still
though they
want
don't
to.
need it.
Yes.
But it's something that you want to do. And then I think, am
Yeah.
I feeding into their entitlement and into their privilege?
Yeah.
And I don't want to do that. But doggone it, I don't see them that often.
You see,
you
now
know?
that's an interesting dynamic between the grandparents because my dad will pick up my youngest from school and he'll say to him, well, shouldn't we go to Dairy Queen? And my son will say, well, I don't think so. My mom just, with the sugar. And then my dad will say, well, didn't you do good on a test? Like, my dad will try to find a way. He's like, well, then we go celebrate that. And don't worry about what your mom thinks. Like, I'll handle that. So I think with grandparents,
It's just different. It's different.
That rule
We get
change.
different rules, don't we?
There are no rules.
That's
right.
Yeah. What do you think, Emily?
Well, I think one of the challenges I have in my job when I think about need or greed is just what the standard of need or greed is that we apply to ourselves and the people that we know personally versus what the standard of need or greed is we apply to the people who are being served by the Department of Human Services. And so I think a good example of that is our SNAP program, which is food assistance. And every year we see challenges to our administration of the program about what should be able to be purchased on SNAP and what shouldn't be able to be purchased. And so talking about kids and having the conversations at the Capitol about kids and whether or not a parent should be able to buy a birthday cake.
Yes,
With their food assistance.
Oh, goodness. Can I just say that?
That's a
What a tough
conversation.
one.
Really?
That's a conversation where legislators feel like we shouldn't use public dollars to buy.
Or a
A
higher
birthday
cost
cake.
cut of meat. I've
Or-
heard that conversation.
And what is that and based, and when we're having that conversation, it's fundamentally a need or greed choice that people are imposing. And I just, my state service is all about humanity and
Yes.
and equality and humanity. And so when we're having these conversations about need or greed, I just hope that people think about need or greed themselves versus need or greed for the people that we're serving at the department.
I think those people using those services deserve the respect of being given the respect, I guess that's the right word, to allow them to make those decisions. They may
Yes.
not all be perfect in our opinions, but I think they really should be able to determine, I need that birthday cake. It's my child. It's
Yes.
a special occasion.
And nobody wakes up saying, the life I want is to live on a state-assisted program and raise
That's
my
right.
children. Nobody
right.
wakes up with that desire. But everybody that has children, I don't care what class and what our definition of being a good mom is going to be based on what we know and the skills we bring to the table. But pretty much most moms that bring babies into this world, they want to do the best.
That's right.
And they do the best with whatever they have. And sometimes people have way more obstacles to overcome than some of us others. And some people, because they have all those obstacles, they didn't perfect the tools, so it takes them a lot longer to be able to get in a better position. But that doesn't come from a place of greed because I don't have anything to begin with.
Right.
And so these are things that I need, and now I'm trying to figure out how do I move myself from here without having all the tools to be able to do that. So that's just my opinion.
Yeah. Well, I think that's great perspective, Junita,
Yeah.
how you brought that. Yeah. And what a wonderful conversation. And I'm sorry to say it's now come to an end, but Commissioner Johnson Piper, we want to thank you for being with us today and helping us understand what the Human Services Department does. And we thank you for your work and all the great things that your team does.
I'm so inspired
Thank
by
you.
you. I really am.
Yes, it's amazing what you are, especially this thing about being the ward of all these people. That just, oh my word, I'm in awe.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thanks for having me.
Oh,
Thanks
yes.
for coming. We appreciate it.
All right. We thank you for being with us today on It's a Woman's World, and we hope to see you next time.
Okay, very good. We'll do a couple of listening or reaction shots. And
Oh,
I thought he was going to say, we'll do it over again from the top.
everyone, you need to be quiet, and everybody look at the guest for a few seconds.
Yeah, this is just,
No
Well,
smiling?
this is uncomfortable, but this
Yeah.
is what we got to do. Okay, and that's it, Beverly?
We're done? with that?
Okay, that's good.
Oh, good. That's worse than a hearing, right? So we have to get a picture.
Yeah,
Okay,
If you
that's
don't
great.
mind.
Yeah,
You okay with that?
that's
That'd be
wonderful.
great.
I'll get my